Well, welcome to Tailgate University. What we thought we'd do today is take a look at some of the common weeds that we have out here, and we've got some here on the tailgate. Weeds that most everybody will find in their pasture this time of year. And most all of us can find this weed here, which is called Virginia pepperweed. And I want you to take a really close look at the seed. The seed pod, if you open it up, will have several really small seeds. And it'll have seed pods all the way down the stem. But one of the defining characteristics that will tell the difference between this and shepherd's purse is the shape of the seed as well as the smell of the plant. This seed would be shaped like a heart if it was shepherd's purse. Also, if you scratch this with your fingernail, take a smell, you'll smell a very peppery smell to it. And that's how we decide whether or not it's shepherd's purse or Virginia pepperweed, neither one of which we want to cultivate in our fields. So this is a weed that we'd want to work on. But notice, this plant has already bloomed and has already set seed. So we're well beyond the time frame that we need to be spraying for this weed. And we'll talk a little bit more about when to spray for these weeds, because most of the weeds we'll talk about are already too mature to spray and really accomplish much control. Another very common weed that you'll find both in yards as well as pasture fields is commonly called wild onion, but the correct term for it is wild garlic. And as you can tell, it looks very much like the onions that we grow in our garden. We have lots of little bulbs, thousands and thousands of little bulbs, and even these really small ones like this one right here on my finger will turn into a whole group of plants come next year. So this will continue to grow and multiply until this becomes a huge bundle of plants. And of course, if there's any doubt as to what you've got, again, this is one that can be identified by smell, simply by rubbing the stem and smelling that very distinctive odor of garlic or onion. Again, this plant is way too mature to spray and expect to get any control. Think about it this way with all plants. All of our chemicals go in through the roots or in through the leaves, travel through the vascular system of the plant to the roots. When you look at the amount of leaf material that's up here versus the amount of energy that's underneath the ground, it's almost impossible to get enough through this leaf system here to kill these bulbs. So we have to really start early and keep this plant stressed if we're ever going to kill it. Another very common weed that we see, and this one is extremely difficult to take care of, and these have started to wilt some, but that is curly dock. And you'll notice kind of an elongated leaf, but you see these puckers right back where the leaf ends at the basal stem. That's very typical of curly dock. Another defining characteristic of curly dock is it'll always grow in a bunch, and you will see some mottling on the stem, kind of a red area on the stem like you see on this one, and kind of mottly where it tends to go into the green part of the stem. This one grows on a big taproot like a carrot, and this one is very, very difficult to kill. And our common 2,4-Ds, things like that, while it will burn the leaves, will do very little to lower the population of this plant. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to control these plants a little later. Two very common weeds found in yards as well as pasture fields that often get called the opposite names are henbit and dead nettle. The easy way to tell is whenever you see the plant, both of them have purple blooms, but whenever you see a plant that has little leaves on stems that are opposite each other, and this plant usually lays on the ground like such, this is henbit. Henbit will always have those leaves on long stems opposite to each other as you go up the stem. Again, the purple bloom, just like dead nettle. But the difference being, and we'll put them side by side, with dead nettle, all the leaves are at the very top of the plant. We call this the Christmas tree, even though it has that same purple bloom. All the leaves will be right in the top and they'll hang downward on the stem. And if you investigate and roll the stem between your fingers, you can tell that it's square. Both of these are a member of the mint family. Both of them have square stems, and all the mints have square stems. Very, very common weed that all of us have in our pastures are plantains, and there are two different kinds. This is called buckhorn plantain. It has a narrow stem, very well-defined ribs. This is the one that comes up with a little seed pod right on top that we used to, as kids, take and bend it over and shoot it at each other. So this is the one that we most commonly see out in pastures and hay fields. Not to be confused with broadleaf plantain. And again, these are starting to wilt some. But you can see a very different leaf. Even though it's a long leaf, it's much wider. This one we'll most commonly find in paths where we walk a lot, or cows walk a lot, or in the edge of roads where there's a lot of traffic, and it grows flat on the ground. But it also has a seed head, but the seeds are all the way up the seed stalk on this one, as opposed to just a little button up on the top that we have with our buckhorn. And if anybody doesn't have this particular weed in their pasture or hay field, you probably don't have a pasture or hay field or yard or a green space anywhere, flower bed or otherwise. This is chickweed, and chickweed grows very prolific. It's mostly water, and we'll see if we can find one that may be starting to bloom here. I don't think we've got anything with a bloom on it here, but this will have a little tiny white bloom on it. Here's one, and this is kind of what the bloom will look like. Now, this is one that seeds extremely easily and well. Each one of these little seed pods right here can have up to 30 to 50 seeds in it. And as you can see, just this little sprig has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different seed pods on it. So it's a very prolific seed producer. So this is one that we really need to be concerned about because it tends to smother out grasses. Another weed that most all of us have, but we hope we don't have, and we'll wait to see if it's going to be there this year. Believe me, it'll be there, and that's buttercup. This one is getting ready to bloom, so we're way past the time to be able to control this one. This one has to be controlled while it's very immature. And we'll see if there's any seeds in this one. And you can see right there, each one of those little projections is going to be a seed. That's the bloom, that's the yellow bloom, and each one of those little pollen projections there will end up being a seed. This one is one that costs us a lot of lost production in our hay fields and pasture fields. This plant, by the way, is also extremely poisonous if cattle eat it. But again, most of the time cattle don't eat it. When we were gathering these plants, and we'll let Sarah kind of zoom in here on the tailgate, all three of these plants are out here are buttercup, and we're all collected within 20 feet of each other. So you see that all of them are not at the same stage. When buttercups are this size, very small, we can do a great job of killing them with nothing but 2,4-D. About a pint per acre with 2,4-D will wipe these out. When they get this big, it takes just a little bit more oomph. But whenever they get this big, basically all we do is burn them back, but we don't reduce the population. Moving on to some other weeds. I want to in particular talk about this one right here. This is hairy bittercress. It has a little tiny white bloom right up in the top. And this is one You can see it's got some round leaves. Whenever it's very immature, you might confuse this with chickweed. But once it runs these seed heads up and you see these seed pods, this is what is kind of the defining characteristic. As you walk through the pasture, you may see, as you touch this, it will actually shoot seeds up to 2 feet away from the original plant. So that's its main way of being able to spread to different areas. So again, this is one that we really want to work on. Of course, looking at things like dandelions. Dandelions, very, very common both in your yard as well as your pasture field. While we don't worry so awful much about this in pasture fields and hay fields, as we tend to control these more economically important weeds, we're going to wipe out a bunch of these weeds that might not be as important. But again, we're going to clear them out. So very briefly, let's talk about how we control some of these weeds. And there's a couple of different methods that you can think of. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is T4D. T4D does a fair job on most of these weeds, with the exception of the curly dock, with the exception of some of the pepperweed if it's a little bit mature, or the hairy bittercress. So lots of times we have to look at combinations with things like dicamba in them. Used to be called Weedmaster many years ago. It's called Brash now. There's a lot of different generic products out there as well that look at the active ingredient level or active ingredient list and look for T4D as well as a dicamba. And that will give you fair to decent control of most of these weeds if we spray at the right time. Make time now to put on your calendar that mid-November to mid-December, after 3 days of 55 or 60 degree weather, to spray. It does not have to be 60 degrees after you spray, but it needs to be 55 or 60 for 3 days prior to spray. If you spray in mid-November to mid-December, then follow that up with another spray at 1st of March. After 360 degree days, you will get these weeds under control. And as always, make sure you read the label on any chemical that you're using and use an appropriate rate. More is not better. More is more expensive, but more is not better. So stay within the labeled rates, and if you need help in terms of selecting the right chemical or in terms of calibrating the sprayer so that you know what you're putting on per acre, then give us a call at the local extension office.